Hello again, class. Um, just wanted to pick up where we left off in Act 2, Scene 2. After Hamlet and uh, Polonius have their discussion, right? Uh, there's a method to his madness, right, is what Polonius says. Uh, and that's one of the more modern expressions that came from this play, right? Though this is madness, yet there be method in it. Um, the scene kind of ends with the players arriving. And if you remember, Hamlet asks them to speak a speech, and he tries to do it first, and he's unsuccessful in it. And that just goes to show how difficult it is to be an actor in the theater. And so, kind of a little bit of comic relief there. Remember, people went to the theater to be entertained, and although these are tragedies, Shakespeare tries to kind of pepper in some comic relief at times. Essentially, the speech that the player recites for Hamlet um, is extremely um, moving, right? A woman is watching her husband get murdered on the battlefield, and Polonius just doesn't get it, right? He doesn't understand the power of the theater. Whereas, so part of the scene is that Hamlet recognizes how important it is to listen to stories, right? To read stories, to learn about life, right? So the theater, just like we're reading the play, can teach us about the human experience, and that's why we read literature. But Polonius doesn't get it, and it shows a lot about his character. At the end of the scene, Hamlet asks the player if he could, when they're doing their play, insert a speech of some lines, insert, his play, which he's going to call the Mousetrap, and the player says, "Yeah, yeah, no problem." So what Hamlet's plan is, right? Because we're in Act 3, Scene 1, and he hasn't really furthered his plan with regard to whether or not he has proof about Claudius being innocent or guilty. So what he decides here is that he's going to use the theater, the play, very symbolic, very significant, to find out about life, to better understand the human experience, right? So Act 3, Scene 1 now opens up with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern reporting to Claudius and Hamlet that Hamlet was acting different. They're not really sure why. Um, and the king and queen are like, okay, we got to keep a watch on him. Um, what's interesting in this scene, though, pay attention to what happens, right? Claudius and Polonius's plan is to spy while Ophelia comes upon Hamlet, right? And watch how they interact to determine whether or not Hamlet is acting crazy, going mad because of neglected love, which is Polonius's thought. That's his theory, that's his inference. And remember, he's given us these various premises as to why he feels that way. Um, they give Ophelia a prayer book, right? And that's significant. Um, and before they do that, they ask Gertrude to leave. And if you notice on line 38, she says, "I shall obey you," right? Notice how even Gertrude, the queen, has to do what she's told, right? And Claudia says, "You need to leave us." And she says, "I shall obey you." And then she says, "And for your part, Ophelia," line 39, "I do wish that your good beauties be the happy cause of Hamlet's wildness. So shall I hope your virtues will bring him to his wonted way again to both your honors." Remember, Polonius says, he don't be with him anymore. He doesn't love you, and he won't marry you because his parents are going to choose his bride. What do we learn here? That Gertrude actually approves of Ophelia. What did we learn in 2:2? That Hamlet actually loves Ophelia. So we see that Polonius bases his reasoning not on facts, but on his own assumptions. And it's important because we always want to be aware of the dangers of hidden assumptions. One way to get rid of those hidden assumptions is to use Occam's razor, the theory that suggests when you have conflicting theories of things, the one that makes the least amount of new assumptions is usually the best. So when you think about Polonius's theory, it's based on assumptions. Why not look at the facts? Right? Now, that being said, they give Ophelia a prayer book, and this is significant, right? Because the Top of page 138 if you have the No Fear edition, or if you're reading a different edition or online. Line 45, Polonius says, read on this book, that show of such an exercise may color your loneliness. We are oft to blame in this, 'tis too much proved, that with devotion's visage and pious action, we do sugar over the devil himself. How true is that? Do bad people not try and act religious to cover up their bad deeds? Right? People that are not logical, right? Not good people. They're full of hubris, not humility, but then they act religious and everything's okay. So we see the ruse here. Because a lot of times, if you see someone, right, with a prayer book, you assume they're religious. So it's a very interesting quote because he understands the duplicity and he's owning it. He's saying, we're going to put on a false front. So that's very significant that they're using that duplicity, and specifically they're manipulating religion. Do we see that often in life? People use religion to mask their bad deeds. Now, that being said, look at what Claudius says and notice how it's an aside. It's like a little mini soliloquy of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines. Now, the question I have for you, is his feeling of guilt, is his oh heavy burden, that he feels bad that he usurped the throne from Hamlet and married the queen too soon? Or maybe is this a hint of things to come, a foreshadowing of things to come? What does he say? Right? Because he says, Polonius says, and with devotion's visage and pious action, we do sugar over the devil himself. People act devoted to God to cover up their bad deeds. What does Claudius say? Oh, 'tis too true. How smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience. Right? You know when somebody says, whip your conscience into shape? Oh, 'tis too true. How smart a lash that speech doth give my conscience. The harlot's cheek, beautied with plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. Oh, heavy burden. Just like one would put on makeup to appear differently, he's painting his words. Is he essentially using in some ways the aside, right, to share with us a moment of guilt? Think of it this way: omniscience is when we learn what the characters are thinking, and the asides and the soliloquies in Shakespeare occur when they share with us information that nobody else in the play knows, right? The question here is, when there are villains in stories such as this one, uh, and they share their feelings with us, they use the omniscience, does that make us not like them a little bit more? Think about it. Whenever somebody says the villain you love to hate, they may lie to everyone else in the play. But if they don't lie to us, is there kind of this weird, right, thankfulness from the audience? Well, oh, well, they lie to everybody else, but at least they tell us the truth. It's very interesting how villains are developed and depicted, and I think omniscience plays a role not in the characters we love, not just in the characters that we love, but also in some ways in the characters that we love to hate. So that being said, I'm going to pause it. We'll pick up with the most famous speech in all of English literature, and so thank you for your attention to part one of the Act 3, Scene 1 lecture, and stay tuned. More to come.